Okay, so we've got a stack of sources today that honestly feel less like your standard business advice and much more like a really urgent warning. We're talking about this explicit alert that the Japanese embassy put out directly to its own citizens, people living and working in China.
Yeah, it's pretty stark.
It really is.
This,
This isn't just, bureaucratic guidance. It feels like an urgent plea. They're telling the Japanese expat community to actively avoid anything that could be misconstrued as espionage.
hmm. So our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear, I think. We need to unpack why Japan is sounding the alarm so loudly right now. What are the specific risks, legal, even physical, that their citizens, and frankly any foreign national, are facing, especially with China's anti-espionage laws being tightened up so dramatically? You've absolutely hit on a critical point there. When a government issues a warning this stern, it's a major signal. It tells you the whole risk calculation for doing international business or even just living abroad has fundamentally shifted almost overnight. It's definitely a reflection of these wider global tensions kind of filtering down, impacting everyday professional life.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Hmm.
What we're really seeing is China's comprehensive anti-espionage law being enforced,
Right.
but with a new kind of rigor, maybe unprecedented rigor. That's the core reason for the alarm, you could say.
Right.
Historically, maybe there was a bit of legal ambiguity. Foreign companies sort of relied on that space, but that's just evaporating now,
Huh.
fast. And that directly raises the risk of detention, like immediately.
That ambiguity,
Yep.
or the lack of it now, that's exactly the danger zone, isn't it? Our sources are saying the enforcement is the real shift, but practically, what's the actual legal change that turns a normal business trip into something high risk? Yeah, good question. That's where you have to look at the legislative nuts and bolts. The big trigger for this current alarm seems to be the 2023 revision of the law. And this revision, it didn't just like add penalties, it massively broadened the definition of state secrets.
Okay. How so?
Well, it used to be more narrowly focused. Think military intelligence, top-level political stuff. Now, it covers a much, much wider range. Economic information, scientific data, tech details, basically anything that could be deemed relevant to national security.
Wow. So the net they can cast is just
Yeah.
significantly wider.
Precisely. And it's not just the scope. The revised law also brought in new powers for authorities, things like seizing digital information, equipment. That legal detail, it ties directly into what we're hearing about smartphone inspections later on.
Yeah.
It kind of sets the stage for this pretty pervasive surveillance. It's not just about corporate offices anymore. It reaches right into your personal devices. The crucial takeaway, I think, is that the law now potentially allows prosecution for activities that would be considered totally standard competitive analysis or even just basic due diligence in almost any other market.
That distinction is key, isn't it, between normal business intelligence gathering and actual espionage.
Yeah.
That's where the line gets incredibly blurry and, frankly, dangerous for international business people.
And here's where it gets really interesting, moving from the law itself to how it's actually playing out on the ground. We're seeing specific examples of activities now flagged as high risk.
Yeah, the alarm bells really started ringing loud and clear with that incident involving the Astellas Pharma employee, a Japanese executive indicted in China on espionage charges.
And the identity matters there. A pharma exec, you know? It wasn't some kind of obvious spy movie scenario that sent huge ripples of alarm through the Japanese business community and beyond, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. Our sources suggest the worry is that this indictment signals they might be targeting people involved in certain kinds of, let's say, detailed economic intelligence gathering.
Hmm.
You can speculate maybe that high-risk stuff now includes things like really intensively mapping out supply chains or doing detailed market surveys where you're talking to former state employees, or maybe even just photographing industrial sites for competitive analysis.
Things that are routine elsewhere.
Exactly. Routine, but now potentially viewed through this very harsh national security lens.
You almost have to assume now, if you're gathering data, any data that gives your company an edge over a Chinese state-owned competitor, and if someone somewhere deems that data sensitive, well, you're suddenly operating in a very risky legal gray zone.
A very gray and potentially shrinking zone.
And that risk feels pervasive now.
And it's not just about big corporate strategy either. The sources also flag something very tangible, very personal, and deeply concerning. China apparently implementing smartphone inspections as part of this whole enforcement push.
Yes, that detail really underscores the The pervasive nature of the security environment. I mean, just think about it. The idea that a customs official could just demand to look through your phone, your personal messages, your
It's a
files.
huge shift.
It's a massive psychological shift for anyone traveling for business, surely. It suggests surveillance isn't just about corporate networks anymore. It's about your personal communications, your private data.
For sure. The sources don't specify how often this happens, but just the power for them to do it under the revised law. It dramatically lowers the tolerance for any kind of gray area in your personal conduct.
Hmm.
Knowing your digital footprint could just be seized and picked apart when you enter or leave.
And we should be clear, this isn't just a knee-jerk reaction to one single case, is it?
No, not at all.
Our sources point to some historical context, too. Apparently, reports indicate quite a few Japanese citizens detained in China over recent years have faced these kinds of espionage-related charges. So it tells you the current warning is more like an acceleration of an existing trend, a sustained security focus. It's not just some anomaly based on one specific geopolitical flare-up.
That's a really important point. The risk is increasing, it's accelerating, like you said, and it's happening precisely because these local enforcement actions aren't in a vacuum. If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
this very stern advisory from Japan, it's being issued against this whole backdrop of rising international scrutiny and, well, tension.
That's the crucial context, absolutely. You've got escalating tensions over flashpoints, the South China Sea is often mentioned, and then there's the broader, often difficult trade and political relationship between, say, the U.S. and China. All of that directly influences how foreign nationals might be perceived on the ground in China. When state-level tensions ratchet up, the perceived risk of foreign interference and therefore the enforcement of anti-espionage laws, it just skyrockets.
So the individual can become a sort of proxy for their home state.
In a sense, yes. The risk gets personalized.
And what's really striking is that this kind of heightened vigilance, it isn't just happening in Beijing. Our sources show this is part of a much wider global trend. We're seeing other countries tightening up too, like Denmark is mentioned.
Yes, Denmark is a really interesting example here. It reflects a similar anxiety, maybe more focused on intellectual property theft or illicit technology transfer. They've apparently stepped up screening for academics and researchers, especially from places like China and Iran. They're explicitly citing espionage concerns, trying to prevent sensitive knowledge from leaving the country.
So it's not just China.
No. It shows that countries pretty much everywhere are reevaluating national security, tightening definitions, and becoming much more cautious about who gets access to sensitive research or data.
It feels like the global tolerance for any kind of ambiguous foreign interaction is just dropping across the board. The rulebook for cross-border work for collaboration, it's being rewritten right now in real time.
So, what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to navigate this new reality? Well, it means international business, academic exchange, even some kinds of specialized personal travel. They all require a significantly higher level of vigilance, much more than even, say, 5 years ago.
Right.
Because of this global increase in security focus and this much lower tolerance for ambiguity around foreign interactions, the risk of a simple misunderstanding, well, it could have really devastating consequences now. It's just higher than ever before.
Okay, so let's quickly summarize the core takeaways from this deep dive. First, we're seeing a rigorously enforced anti-espionage law in China. Its scope has been dramatically broadened. Second, this presents a clear present risk for foreign business people, even for routine activities like collecting data. And that risk extends right down to potentially having your digital devices inspected. And third, fundamentally, this individual risk, it's explicitly linked to rising geopolitical tensions between major powers. State-level conflict is now, unfortunately, a personal risk factor.
Exactly. And that leads us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you to mull over. Given this global trend, this move towards more aggressive security screening, these really expansive anti-espionage laws where even basic market research could potentially be criminalized, how should international organizations or even just independent travelers redefine due diligence today when you're operating across borders? What kinds of ethical precautions or logistical ones like data retention policies where you hold meetings, maybe even the specific questions you ask now becomes mandatory, even for stuff that used to feel completely routine. You really have to think about how the legal risks simmering in one part of the world might force you to fundamentally change your professional conduct everywhere else.